Hello and welcome to the NR427 Lesson 3 video lecture for accessing spatial data from online sources. In this lesson, we're going to break it up into two pieces. And first, we're going to talk about how to get data from an ArcGIS Online feature set, or how to get data from an ArcGIS Online feature service and take it as what's called a feature set, and then how we can use that feature set live and streaming from the online system in your own geoprocessing tools. And then in the second half, we will look at downloading static files from the web using the requests library and the get method in the request library. And then hopefully we'll be putting it all together so you can continue the workflow. That workflow being potentially getting data from the internet, either as a feature service or downloading file, preparing the data for use, so unzipping it, copying the data, putting it into the right place, reading values from a CSV, all those things we talked about in Lesson 2, how to copy or back up the file or rename it so you don't mess up the original, and then performing data analysis. So we've already covered this middle part here that was kind of Lesson 2. Data analysis, well, that was the heart of NR426, so we spent a lot of time on that. And then right now, Lesson 3 will be doing the internet part. So hopefully now you'll have all the pieces to put it together and do a really cool script. So fetching data from the internet. There are two basic ways that you can do this. One is to point to what's called a service, a web service or a feature service or a web mapping service. You can take that service and just using the URL, be able to capture the information from that service and put it into a format that your script can read and use it from a service, kind of like you're streaming the data. So that's what we'll talk about first. The advantages to doing it this way is that your data are always up to date because you're streaming it. Anytime the owner of the data updates it, then you have the most up-to-date version. So every time you run your script, it's going to ping that service and you'll always have the most up-to-date version. A couple of resources for you here. We have extracting features from map services, how-to, which is a really good little how-to tutorial for you, and then some help for you. So help on the REST API documentation from ArcGIS, and also on feature sets, again, from the arcpy help. So these two will help explain things a little bit more and be a good reference for you. Okay, so this idea of streaming data from a service, what we're working with is called a REST service. An ArcGIS feature service is called a REST service, and it's just a standard for how data are posted and shared on the cloud and then how they can be accessed. So the bottom line is you can point to the URL, and it has to be formatted the right way, but you can point to a URL using the right tools and the correct URL, and then you can get that data from your code. So if you were to just click on that URL for the service and look at it, this is what it would look like on the right. So there's not really a lot you can do with it here, but it does give you some information. So you can see right now we're looking at a service, a feature service for one service that contains actually two layers in it, Colorado cities and buffers. So that's two layers in one service. And this is just a little bit of metadata about it, some drawing info, extent, things like that. And so here's a basic example. If you had the URL, this is what it would look like if you had arcpy. So this again, we're getting back into arcpy, so we're using arcpy again. So you'd have to import arcpy, set your overwrite to true in case you already have it in memory. And then you would take the URL for the service, and I'll show you how to get that. So right here, your URL, and it's so long it's getting cut off. That's why we have the ... And then what you're doing is creating a feature set in your code that's like a temporary feature layer in your code that you can access. So we load the URL into the feature set. So first we make the empty feature set, kind of like a placeholder, and then we load the features from the URL into the feature set. So now bus feature set, once it's been loaded, is a layer. It's a layer that contains data that you can treat like any other layer, that you can do a describe on, you could run a tool on, you could get to the table, you could do whatever you need to it. Another thing that you can do optionally is save it. So you can take data from online and do FeatureSet.save. Now what this will do is save a static copy to your local machine, in this case into this geodatabase. But what you're doing there is kind of defeating the purpose of using online data, because once you save it, it's static and it's disconnected from the feature service. So if the owner of the data went back and updated the bus stops online, then your saved version would no longer see those updates. So you can save it, but just be careful about when it would make sense to save it or not. So this URL right here, it's getting cut off. We can't even see the whole thing, but let's just talk really quickly about the format and structure of a URL. So the URL is just a link, basically, that when you click on it, it takes you to a web page. But when you're talking about complex things, there's all these different pieces to a URL that you might not even know are there. So this video here goes into it pretty well. That's where these screenshots are from. So there's a lot you can do with a URL. You can point to a URL. There's a library called URL lib where you can actually read web pages and read the text and get things from a web page. We're not going to really get into that, but just know that it's available. What I want to look at is kind of breaking down what is in a URL. So here's an example from YouTube. We all know the basic link for YouTube is just youtube.com. But then if you ever look at a link for an individual video, it's going to have all this stuff here. So what you have here, after the main link, you have these pieces that control the video ID, and then even other things like start time or other ways to query what's in that URL. So in this case, we have the video ID, and then the start time. With your REST feature service URLs, you will also have a lot of stuff that looks like gibberish here with some question marks, and those are all very specific things. So let me go into the website. So here we're looking at the help. And if you need to point to a feature service, there's ways to query what's in that feature service. So I'm going to go down here. So after your main URL, there's all these different things that you can add to your URL for what type of format it's going to be, what type of geometry, spatial reference, time, layer. There's one for layers as well. But here is one example of a URL, and it's got all these different pieces to it. All those different pieces mean something very specific. Now there's a lot more to this than we can get into right here, but I did just want to point it out because if we go back to the slides here, when you go through and do your URL is going to have a lot more to it. This is the complete URL if we actually looked at the whole thing. So we have our basic URL, which goes up to here, I think. And then we have a number 1, and then we have query question mark where object ID is greater than 0 and ampersand, outfields equals star, and F equals JSON. So these are the pieces that you need in order to get the right thing out of the feature service. It's kind of like doing a query. It is doing a query. So here we are taking this feature service. We're getting the number 1 layer in the service because it contains 2 layers. So we're getting the number 1, and then we're querying it to tell it what features we want to get out of it. We want everything where object ID is greater than 0. So that's everything. We are querying what fields or columns in the table we want to get. We're doing equals asterisk. So that's getting everything. And then F equals JSON. That's that's how we can get the format to be in JSON format, and that's the format that we want to work with. So your link, your URL is going to have all these different pieces there, and you want all of them. So don't delete this, or else it might not work right. So a little more about how to get this URL. Where does it come from? So there are kind of two ways to look at it. So you can go to a website or like an open data portal. Boulder County is one such example. And if you go to, I can just go to it because I have it open. If you go to it here, here's the Boulder County Open Data Portal. If you click on the link for Open Data Portal, tell it what layer you want to find, and then go find a layer. Here is that link right here. It's so long, it doesn't even show you the whole thing, but what you can then do is copy the link address, and that's what you would want. Another example, here is the Fort Collins page. Fort Collins also has an open data portal, and if you go there, I just clicked on addresses. Normally, you get the options to download, so there's your download options right there. And then here is the link to the service. So you can just copy this, Control C, you can copy that, and that will be the link that you need to get to this as a feature service from Python. What if you write in ArcGIS Online? So that's the other way. So here I am in ArcGIS Online, and I have a whole bunch of feature layers. This is my own content. So here are the prairie dog layers from the NR427 class. Here is that Colorado Cities and Buffers feature layer, and it's one feature service that contains two layers. So you would go down to the bottom of the page and you would copy this service URL right here, and then you'd have to add on the query part to tell it what layer you want, one or two, and what format and what IDs that you want. There might be another way to shortcut that, but I have not figured it out yet. So that's what I do. So let's take a look at some code for this. So this is the demo script that you guys have on Canvas and on the N drive. And so what we're doing here is, again, we're importing arcpy because we're back into the arcpy world with these feature sets, setting our overwrite to true. And what we can do is set some variables. So here we're setting a variable for the data URL, which is the URL of my service. So here's the basic service. And then this is what layer I want. I want layer 1. And then here's my query part to tell it that I want all features, all fields, and format in JSON. So you set that up first. And then you can set a workspace. If you're going to download something and actually save it locally, you might want to set a workspace. I'm going to just set mine to see student, just to have something in there. If I wanted to download it, again, I could set my path. If it was going to be different, I don't need to do it because it's my workspace. And now what we're going to do is create a feature set variable. We're going to make a variable for this feature set. We're going to point to the online data. We're going to load it into memory. So we will call this CO cities. Okay. And so that now CO cities is an empty feature set. There's nothing in it yet. So what we need to do next is load the data from the URL into the feature set. And so if you recall from here, the way to do that is just with the .load. So the feature set .load and then the URL. So now we're ready to load it in, and so we're going to do feature set .load and then the URL, data URL. And that's it. So that makes the empty placeholder. It loads the features from the online service into the feature set. And then if we wanted to, we could save it out like this and then put a path in here. I'm not actually going to do that, but that's how you could save it out locally. But again, it's kind of defeating the purpose because then it's static and it's no longer getting the data from online. And then what you can do is write a little code to make sure it really saved. So you can check to see if it exists locally. You can do a describe on it or whatever you need to. Since I didn't actually save it, I'm not going to do that because saving it is not as common. But then I have my CO cities. I could do things like print arcpy.getCount COCities. And I could print out how many features are in that feature set. Just for good measure, I'm going to do that. Okay, took a while, but it finally finished. So it loaded in the features from the feature set, and it printed out 2. There are 2 features in it. I don't know why it took so long, but there's your example. But just know that once you have your feature set object with features loaded into it, you can treat it like any other tool. You might as well have done my data equals path.shapefile, and it's the same thing. So COCities now can be treated like any other layer, any other spatial data set. I ran getCount on it. I could run describe on it. I could run any tool I want on it, and it could be part of a larger workflow, but using data right from online. So I don't have to download it. It's not taking up room on my own machine, and it's always up to date. So that's really all we had for this first part. So on your own, what you're going to do, which is written into the bottom of this, on your own, you're going to find the URL for a prairie dog range feature service. You're going to load that into a feature set and then perform an operation to remove the areas that are too close to cities or roads from the range polygon. So you'll have a big range polygon, and then you're going to somehow get rid of the areas that are buffered, the city buffer. You're going to get rid of those. So you'll have to figure out what tool to use and then write the code to do it. And that will be your part 1 of your lab. That will be this right here. So you'll access that second feature service, do the operation, and then make it a nice script with good variables, good naming conventions, comments, messaging, throw in a little error checking, make sure things exist or don't exist, or make sure they're the right type. So all those things. So part 2, what we'll do next in a separate video, will be just straight up downloading files from a website. So check out the other video for that.